3 years after the United States declared their independence from Great Britain, President George Washington issued an order to conduct a scorched earth campaign to destroy the crops, homesteads, and villages of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. The American Revolutionary War had been going on for nearly 4 years at that time, and President Washington claimed to have taken action against Haudenosaunee nations and communities who had a history of siding with the British. This included the Onondaga Nation, the Seneca Nation, and the Gayakohono, the Cayuga Nation. The campaign lasted for almost 4 months, from June to October of 1779, and was led by U.S. Generals John Sullivan and James Clinton. During that time, General Sullivan reported to President Washington that the campaign successfully destroyed thousands of bushels of corn, vast quantities of vegetables, stored foods, and 40 towns, before running out of supplies, which deemed the U.S. Army unable to continue the campaign. This was intended to eradicate beyond repair the livelihoods of the Haudenosaunee peoples as a starvation tactic to ensure that they would not survive the oncoming winter. This scorched earth campaign, which scholar Rhiannon Kohler argues as genocide, ultimately led to the forced relocation of several Haudenosaunee communities, including the displacement of the Gayakohono from their homelands around Cayuga Lake. Lieutenant John Hardenberg, Sergeant Major George Grant, and Lieutenant John Jenkins recorded the destruction of the Cayuga Castle on September 23, 1779, tallying over 100 houses, several orchards, multiple gardens, and 200 acres of corn. Following the destruction of the Cayuga Castle, the Gayakohono were forced to take refuge with other Haudenosaunee communities, making their way across the Confederacy to Fort Niagara before landing in Swekia, Six Nations community of Grand River. The Sullivan-Clinton genocide committed by the United States against the Haudenosaunee was one of the first official actions of the newly formed United States. The destruction of the Cayuga Castle proved that this event was intended to completely eradicate the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. It was from then on that the Gayakohono gave the name of U.S. President Honodagayas, meaning town destroyer. Now, 250 years later, the Gayakohono have made their way back to Cayuga Lake, once again settling in their homelands. Knowing the history of this land and of the Gayakohono peoples, I asked myself what I could do as a newcomer to these territories to demonstrate a sense of responsibility and reciprocity to the Gayakohono. I am from the Tuscarora Nation. I work in media production investigating the use of new media to propagate indigenous knowledge and experiences. I read an article by Rhiannon Kohler that quantified the destruction of the Sullivan-Clinton genocide and was struck by the reported figures of towns and crops that were destroyed. Thousands of bushels of corn. Our oral histories at Tuscarora inform us that it was Tuscarora's white corn that was shared throughout Haudenosaunee communities to supplement the loss of the Confederacy's and individual nations' corn following the Sullivan-Clinton genocide. Because of this, I took a particular interest in the amount of corn that was lost during this event. I looked at the 200 acres of corn that were destroyed at Cayuga Castle. It was a large figure that I had trouble interpreting for myself, so I decided to use my experience in media development to visualize the destroyed corn. The Cayuga Castle is located on the northwestern side of Cayuga Lake. I began by looking at maps of Cayuga Castle and used these images as references to recreate the land and the 200 acres of corn in a 3D virtual environment. I created rough maps referencing online sources waymarking.com and Google Maps, measuring out what 200 acres of corn would look like next to each other. Kohler's analysis pointed out that there were numerous amounts of destruction. However, I decided only to focus on the 200 acres of corn that were destroyed as an initial step in forming a visual understanding of this information. I referenced Tuscarora scholar Dr. Jane Mountpleasant's research and accompanying article, The Paradox of Plows and Productivity, to inform how many bushels 1 acre of corn could produce. Based on planting experiments in 1996 and 1997, Dr. Mountpleasant reported that Haudenosaunee corn planted at 20,000 seeds per acre could propagate an average of 64 bushels of corn. I created a 1-to-1 scale digital model of 1 acre of corn at approximately 4,047 square meters and then 200 acres of corn, along with their respective number of bushels that each acre would have propagated. 1 acre can produce 64 bushels of corn. Multiplying that by 200 acres of corn destroyed at the Cayuga Castle equals an estimate of 12,800 bushels. It was disturbing to see what 200 acres of destroyed corn looks like, but then to see the tens of thousands of bushels of corn that it would have produced is of shocking value. 12,800 bushels of corn. I unfortunately did not have the computer power to render the full 200 acres of corn, so I created square blocks as acre markers and placeholders. It allowed me to see not only what the amount of space that 200 acres would look like, but I decided to place a burn texture on these placeholders, which gave an eerie feeling of what 200 acres of scorched cornfield looks like. Although this visualization is difficult to digest, it is important to render for our understanding of this history. This history is part of the Gaiacohono and U.S. history. It is part of the land's history. Although this visualization illustrates the sad destruction of this moment, I think it also emphasizes the strength of the Gaiacohono people. This is how much corn they planted to feed their people in the late 1700s. This amount of corn indicates that there was an intricate network of Gaiacohono people in order to sow, maintain, and propagate this amount of corn. So many more questions arise from this experiment. How many people can 12,800 bushels of corn feed? I imagine a livelihood built around this corn, and how it existed here for a time immemorial, and is once again making its return. I view this visualization as a first step I view this visualization as a step in understanding our role as peoples occupying Gaiacohono territories. What can we do to support the Gaiacohono and ensure that their livelihoods and these 200 acres of corn are repatriated and propagated once again?